Good morning. Thank you so much for being here this morning at this Early Childhood Centre, where we are for me to announce changes to the FamilyBoost scheme, which will be very good news for thousands of households across New Zealand. We know that the cost of living is a major concern for many New Zealand families who are struggling to get by and need all the help they can get to get ahead. One of the most expensive periods in life is when families have young children. Just going to work to earn an income costs money because of the early childhood fees that people have to pay in order to be able to work. And many families find that when those costs come in, it's a big hit to the bank balance. That's why last year the government announced our FamilyBoost scheme, which is all about giving parents a bit of relief from their early childhood fees. The scheme works by allowing parents to claim a portion of the fees they pay. The way that they do that is they send a quarterly statement of their fees into the Inland Revenue Department, who matches it with their income and then provides them a payment back into their bank accounts. When we first started the scheme, the proportion of fees that you could get back was 25% of your weekly costs. So, for example, a family paying $100 a week in fees was eligible for up to $25 a week in payment. And today I am announcing that we are increasing that payment up from 25% to 40%, meaning that families will be eligible for more support every time they claim for FamilyBoost. So, for example, to go back to that family with $100 a week in fees, that would mean that they are eligible for an additional $15 every week, which amounts to an increase from $1,300 to $2,080 a year, making them hundreds of dollars better off during the course of that year. The scheme is of course capped so that not all households are eligible. It depends on your income. Previously, payments under the scheme maxed out for families earning $180,000 a year, and from now on that maximum will be $230,000 a year. What that means is that many more families who weren't previously eligible for FamilyBoost will now be able to apply for the scheme, and I encourage them to do so. So there's two key things here. The first is, for those families who are already in FamilyBoost, 60,000 of whom have already received payments, the good news is your payments are going to get bigger from 1 October. The second piece of news is that many more families will now be eligible for the scheme. So if you know you've just been on the borderline or you thought you earned too much, we encourage you to apply for the scheme. Go to the IRD website to find out whether you are eligible. We've been advised that these changes will make thousands more families eligible, but of course whether they take it up or not is up to them. IRD estimate around 16,000 more families will take it up at these different income levels. But again, as I say, all families who are currently in the scheme may also be eligible for bigger payments. We are always doing what we can to make the scheme easier, and so IRD will be continuing work to see whether we can get a direct fee refund model going. They will be working with early childhood services over the next little while to see whether we can have a claim system that allows fees to be directly claimed by early childhood providers so parents don't need to do the work with IRD. That work will continue. At the same time, we're aware that the early childhood funding area can be quite confusing for parents. Parents are eligible for many different supports: early childcare subsidies, sessional rates, 20 hours ECE and FamilyBoost. So there is a review underway of the early childhood funding system to ensure that we are making things as simple, straightforward and effective as possible, and FamilyBoost will be included in that because our goal is simple. We want to ease the cost of living for families at what can be a really challenging time in life. When I think back to when my children were in ECE, and I have 4 of them, what I remember is not only being exhausted, having sleepless nights, having a bigger nappy and infant formula bill, but also being hit with really hard fees by my early childhood centre, watching that money drain out of the bank account. FamilyBoost addresses that issue head on and supports those families who are working really hard to get ahead both for themselves and their kids. So with that, I'm very happy to take your questions. No, I don't. This scheme was always intended to provide parents a refund for their early childhood fees. The challenge we had was estimating how much fees are people actually paying and what is the income of those people paying the fees. Of course, only families who are paying $300 a week or more are eligible for the maximum payment. But all families within the income threshold are eligible for payments as a proportion of their overall fees. We now have a lot more information, both about uptake of the scheme and the fee levels by those on different income levels. So that means that we're able to tweak the scheme and allow more money to go out the door to more people. The good news is that we don't need to use more money in our budget to do this. We just need to make better use of the money that's already there. And IRD advises that with these changes, not only will more Kiwis be better off, but we'll also be able to do it within our budget. Well, actually, families who have made the refund tell us that it only takes 5 minutes, because early childhood services have done such a good job at producing quarterly statements. You only need to make the claim once every 3 months, so as long as your early childhood service gives you a 3-month invoice, all you need to do is upload it to the IRD website and IRD do the income matching for you. I've spoken with people and been emailed by people who've said, I thought it would be hard, but once I got on the website, it was actually really easy. I get it. Life admin is hard. If I could take that life admin away, I would, but I just encourage people. It's worth hundreds of dollars to you. Take that 5 to 10 minutes, go on the IRD website, and payments are made really quickly. They go straight into your bank account, and I've heard from people who've said, look, that's the money that helped them pay their power bill, helped them pay for their warrant of fitness, meant they could buy a few extras at the supermarket. So it's meaningful, and look, this is the best way to get the cash directly to parents.
They were contractors. So their income really improved over so some quarters they qualified, some they didn't. If you even it out over the year, they were time. Because their payments were very good, they often found it didn't qualify.
Look, it is right that people with varied incomes through the year found that some quarters they weren't eligible for the scheme. That's why we are lifting the eligibility rate so that more families in those circumstances can still qualify for quarterly payments. By raising that maximum income threshold, we ensure that people with variable income through the year will be eligible for the scheme. There are families, of course, who are in a situation where they earn more over one 3-month period than over another, and by lifting the overall eligibility income, we mean many of them will now be incorporated into the scheme.
Going back to that, putting the onus on the parents in terms of that process, that does put the burden on them, and you do acknowledge that Mark's looking at it with the system to make it a bit easier. So you do acknowledge that it is not ideal, and actually a huge chunk of the money allocated to this whole scheme is actually going on admin base. So how are you making that?
Well, look, the number one barrier to people accessing FamilyBoost is just people being aware of the scheme. And so that's the number one message that I have today, is if you've got kids in early childhood education, and we know that there's 162,000 New Zealand families in that situation, go online, IRD FamilyBoost, you may well be eligible. Most New Zealand families are now, with children, are now eligible for the scheme. In terms of the administration costs, they're actually a very small proportion of the overall funding for the scheme, And look, ideally, I would just put the money straight in people's bank accounts, which is why we are now looking at whether or not we can do that via early childhood education providers. But this is the simplest way to get the cash to people direct using the systems that we currently have. Of course, the other side of it was that in order to change IRD's entire systems, that would have slowed things down. And I was determined that people would get this payment straight away and that they wouldn't have to wait for a couple of years of development before that would be the case. Well, I've asked IRD to prioritise this on their tax and social policy work program, and I expect they will be working with some of the bigger centres in the first instance, and I'll be receiving updates through the year. Well, the overall appropriation for the scheme over 4 years is around $700 million. To date, the annual uptake suggested that we were going to spend a lot less than this. So when we designed these changes, we designed them in such a way that they would take up that full appropriation. What IRD now have that they didn't have in the past is a better estimate of how many people who are eligible will actually take it up. And it has been the case that fewer people than are eligible will take it up. We expect that will continue, although, as I say, the good news is that those families who are currently getting the scheme will now get many more dollars out of it, and many families who might have previously thought they weren't eligible become eligible.
Yeah.
Well, the full amount is 40% of your weekly fees. So how much you receive depends on your weekly fees and your household income. So anyone earning $140,000 or less as a household are eligible for the full 40% of their fees. So it really depends on how many fees you pay, what the maximum entitlement is. At the same time, families earning more than $140,000 are also eligible for the scheme up to incomes, as I said, of $230,000, but your refund amount is a little bit lower depending on your income level.
What are the new estimates?
Well, it's very difficult because it depends on people's circumstances. It depends on that combination of how much fees they pay and also what their income is. And we estimate that only a small proportion of families actually pay fees of $300 a week. So the maximum entitlement is just a cut-off. The maximum you can get under the scheme is $120 a week. But we estimate that most families will receive less than that because they'll receive 40% of their weekly fees. So, for example, a family paying $200 in early childhood fees, which might be some of the families here, they'll now get $80 under the scheme, whereas they used to get $50 under the scheme. So what we were keen to do was ensure that more families got more rebate, and these changes achieve that, both in terms of more families being eligible and the families also taking part getting more money. Yeah, look, the estimates for how many people would be eligible was around that, and we now estimate that more than that will be eligible. However, IRD now have moderated their assumptions to say we don't think everyone who's eligible will take it up. So it will really depend on take-up, but IRD are estimating that with these changes, they expect around 92,000 people will probably take it up. But of course, it's highly variable. It depends on people's fees, their income levels, whether or not they take part in the scheme. Look, I think there's been some unhelpful commentary, all based on people with $300 a week in fees.
You did sort of, emphasise that part of it.
Well, that was always the maximum entitlement, and as we've shown, a lot of families don't pay that much in weekly early childhood fees. And actually, I'm pleased about that because $300 a week in early childhood fees is a heck of a lot. But what we wanted to make sure is that even if you're paying lower levels of fees, you can still qualify for the scheme. The other thing that's been made clear is that many families on very low incomes already get quite a lot of support through the MSD childcare subsidy. And so those families who on very, very low incomes already qualify for that scheme, and so this Family Boost scheme is less relevant for them. The Family Boost scheme is really about the squeezed middle. It's about the battler who's earning too much to qualify for an MSD subsidy, but really is finding it tough every fortnight to pay the bills, and this is a big way to help them with those bills. Well, look, I've learnt that the early childhood education system is hugely variable. The circumstances of families vary from one part of the country, one ECE service to another, and their needs change throughout the year. It's very hard to predict what their annual fees will be or what their annual income will be, because it's just a time of life where there are lots of changes. People add to their families, they take on more hours, they reduce their hours, and all of that complexity does make it hard for our officials to give us really accurate estimates of what will happen, because they're trying to predict the future. They're trying to predict what circumstances families will be in, and that's not always easy to predict. And I think the thing I'd always emphasise in future with all of you would be there's a difference between an estimate and an actual, and that's certainly been the case with Family Boost, that the actuals are different from the estimates. And I'd also say that there's a difference between a maximum and an average. So how much you receive absolutely depends on the fees you pay, but I would say we've met every commitment we made in terms of what the scheme actually is eligible for. So you are eligible for 40% of your fees as long as you're within the income levels. Well, I'm really pleased that we have met our promise to ensure that middle income families can get rebates for their early childhood education fees. That was at the heart of our commitment, and thanks to this policy, tens of thousands of New Zealand families will now be getting hundreds of dollars each year into their bank accounts that they wouldn't have otherwise got. How that applies to individual families depends on their circumstances. Well, no, because actually in this instance, IRD's estimates that they gave us officially in government weren't quite right. So unfortunately, it's an example where even the officials grappled with the complexity of the way that the early childhood funding system works.
Can I just quickly ask about the Herald story this morning in terms of looking at taxes for banks? Can you just explain what you're doing there?
Last year I asked the IRD for advice on how income tax laws apply to the major banks in New Zealand, particularly compared with Australia, and they are continuing that work and continuing to give me advice. Well, that's not what we've been looking at. The issues are to do with the way that parent banks and branch banks in New Zealand interact for tax purposes. There's some very arcane and complex tax law in that area where the OECD have guidance and New Zealand does it slightly differently, and also looking at issues such as the Australia major bank levy, which is something that we don't have here. So there's a range of highly technical, highly complex issues with the way that banks are taxed, and we're just doing a check-in to make sure that it's resulting in an overall fair system.
Is any part of this intended to generate more money?
Well, it could do if we found that banks were not paying the full amount of tax that we would expect them to, then it could result in additional revenue for the Crown.
And should New Zealand banks here be basically similar to the major banks?
Well, we're continuing work in this area and I'm not ruling it out.
When do you expect to hear back? When can they expect to hear more?
I wouldn't expect to make any announcements on this until the budget next year. Okay, thank you.